2 years before the landing of Apollo 12. Commander Charles P. Conrad dismantled parts of Surveyor 3. Later, they would be examined on Earth for remains of terrestrial bacteria, which might have survived the harsh conditions on the Moon. The results remain the subject of controversy to this day.
Okay, Houston, I'm going to the TV camera now.
The pilot of the lunar module, Alan Bean, carried the television camera to a new location. For a brief moment, the camera tube was exposed to direct sunlight. The camera was destroyed immediately. So, from the very start of the extravehicular activity, television broadcasts were no longer possible. The U.S. television stations made do with actors who imitated the actions of the astronauts like marionettes. The sound transmissions were used as stage directions.
Look at that rock. It's coming to that rock.
Despite the TV camera's failure, the astronauts succeeded in taking fascinating shots of the Moon's surface. Designed by Hasselblad, the camera documented a 360-degree pan around the spot where the lunar module Intrepid had landed. During their return flight to Earth, the crew witnessed a solar eclipse. The difference was that, unlike an eclipse of the sun on Earth, it was not the Moon that obscured the sun, but rather the Earth that passed in front of our home star. Apollo 13 is regarded as NASA's most successful failure. Jim Lovell, John Swigert, and Fred Hayes had to fight for their lives.
Hey, Houston, we've had a problem here.
Can say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem. Main B bus undervolt.
Roger, main B undervolt. Stand by, 13, we're looking at it.
We had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning there.
After almost 56 hours of flight and 300,000 kilometers away from the Earth, oxygen tank number 2 exploded. The reason was a short circuit in the thermostat. The adjacent oxygen tank number 1 was also affected. Its contents emptied entirely into space within 130 minutes. The flight controllers calculated that the 3 fuel cells that were fed with oxygen from the 2 tanks would only continue to work for a few more hours. The water and power supply to the spacecraft threatened to break down. The Apollo 13 mission had to be aborted. The lunar module Aquarius now became a lifeboat. The problem was that the Aquarius was only designed for 2 people. The carbon dioxide level in the air rose to a dangerous level. The astronauts risked suffocation. NASA had to improvise. Using items on board like bags, sticky tapes, flight plans, and the commander's sock, they made an adapter for the air purification system. It wasn't possible for the spacecraft to return directly to Earth. The return journey began with a swing-by maneuver around the Moon. The temperature in the lunar module sank to 32 degrees Fahrenheit in order to save power. On April 17, 1970, 6 days after the launch, Apollo 13 swung into orbit around the Earth. The lunar module was separated. It would burn up over the South Pacific Ocean. On board was a radionuclide battery. This nuclear battery was in a protective casing that would survive re-entry intact, and that had been specially constructed for just such a situation. To this day, the radionuclide battery containing 3.9 kilograms of plutonium-238 lies at a depth of 6,000 meters on the seabed. The radio silence caused by ionization lasted longer than expected. The cause was that the angle of re-entry was flatter than had been calculated because the scientists forgot to allow for the fact that there was no moon rock on board. This would have increased the weight of the capsule, thereby making the trajectory steeper. Had the astronauts on board burned to death during re-entry, the agonizing radio silence continued.
Odyssey Houston standing by, over.
Apollo 13 should be out of blackout at this time. We're standing by for any reports of Orion acquisition.
Okay, we read you, Jack.
After over 4 minutes of radio blackout, there were signs of relief all around. The lives of the 3 men on board had been saved. Apollo 13 showed how the men at Mission Control and the astronauts on board were able to master an apparently impossible task. New space heroes were born. The landing area of Apollo 14 was the Framoro Highlands, which had originally been the goal of Apollo 13. The lunar module Antares was to be extracted from the third stage of the rocket. The attempts to link up the command module and the lunar module dragged on for over 2 hours without success. 3 times in succession, the docking maneuver failed. Moreover, a peeling layer of paint designed to reduce heating up of the command module by the sun impaired their sight. The reason for the failed attempts at docking lay in the clasps of the docking mechanism. After the command module has docked with the lunar module, the clasps are supposed to ensure a stable connection. The self-locking clasps refused to snap shut. The link-up only succeeded after 6 docking attempts. The solution was brute force. The reaction control thrusters of the command module provided an extra thrust during the docking with the lunar module. The lunar module Antares separated from the mothership in lunar orbit, and the landing could start. But soon, an unexpected problem occurred. The computer in the lunar module received a signal to abort. If the command abort is received during the descent to the moon's surface, the module automatically begins an emergency ascent back up into orbit. It was the onerous task of computer programmer Donald Ailes to solve the problem. A speck of dust had got caught up in a switch, and it prompted the command abort. Ailes had to reprogram the lunar module so that it would ignore the faulty signal. The software was tested successfully in a simulator in Cape Kennedy. And then, another problem occurred. The landing radar was not transmitting any data. Just 5,500 meters above the landing area, the astronauts succeeded in getting the equipment to function again. During their extravehicular activities, the astronauts used an unpowered handcart, the Modular Equipment Transporter, or MET for short. At this point in time, the lunar rover hadn't yet been constructed. The radionuclide battery supplied the central station with power. The central station was the heart of the installation. It distributed power to the measuring equipment and transmitted data back to Earth. Apollo 14 was packed full of experiments. The Apollo Lunar Surface Experiments package was an instrument cluster used to conduct long-term lunar experiments. The lifespan of the instruments was generally about 1 to 2 years. They primarily measured seismic activities, the composition of the solar wind, the gravitation, and the moon's magnetic field. At Mission Control, the data were analyzed by scientists from different fields. On their second day on the moon, Commander Alan Shepard and the pilot of the lunar module, Edgar Mitchell, planned to reach the upper edge of the Cone moon crater. Orientation is difficult. In almost 4.5 hours, the astronauts only travel about 3 kilometers. They deviate from their route and lose valuable time. Their oxygen consumption is higher than planned. The astronauts are sweating profusely because they have to drag the heavy MET through the deep moon dust. They are running out of time. The oxygen supply from the life support system the astronauts are carrying on their backs is running out. Frustrated, the moon scientists have to abandon their mission of exploration. On the high-resolution picture of the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter from 2009, we can see that the astronauts had missed the edge of the Cone crater by just 30 meters. Apollo 12 astronaut Alan Bean, who became a successful painter after his active time at NASA, recorded in a painting something that has gone down in the annals of sport, the first game of golf on the moon. For this, Commander Alan Shepard smuggled an iron head of a golf club and 2 golf balls on board. He used a sample extraction tool as a shaft.